materials that make up living organisms find their way back to the physical environment and are reused by other living organisms. Such cyclic process of materials ensures the continuous supply of much-needed materials to sustain life in ecosystems. Ang tawag sa mga pathways na ito ay biogeochemical cycles. We are going to discuss 4 out of the biogeochemical cycles that occur in nature. We are going to discuss water or hydrologic cycle, oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle, nitrogen cycle, at phosphorus cycle. Simulan natin sa water or hydrologic cycle. To explain this cycle, first, kailangan natin ng isang body of water just like this small pond. Evaporation from the bodies of water release water vapor into the atmosphere. After that, the process of condensation changes water vapor back into liquid water, forming clouds above. Then, they return back to Earth in a process called precipitation, which may be in a form of rain, snow, and other forms of precipitation. And when it precipitates or it rains, the water on the ground infiltrates into the soil in a process called infiltration. When excess rainwater can no longer sufficiently infiltrate the soil, it flows or runs off over the land's surface. It may stay stagnant on the land or it may combine to other bodies of water. After this, evaporation will occur again, hence the water cycle. Aside from these processes, we also have one process which occur among plants. It is transpiration. Transpiration is simply the evaporation of water from the leaves of the plant. It also contributes to the amount of water vapor in our atmosphere. That's just a very brief explanation of the water cycle. Now let's proceed to the next one. The oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle. We, humans, use oxygen for bodily processes. Just like most living organisms, animals and plants also breathe in oxygen. Let's have another trivia. Do plants breathe in oxygen? Yes, you heard it right. Plants also breathe in oxygen. Most students have learned that plants take up carbon dioxide from the air and produce oxygen as byproduct of a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast of a plant cell, but it is less well known that plants also need oxygen. Plants, like animals, have active metabolism fueling all bodily activities. For this, almost all organisms need oxygen to create energy, and this happens in a complex process called cellular respiration. In cellular respiration, oxygen interacts with glucose to produce energy. We will be having a separate video discussing cellular respiration. Cellular respiration that uses oxygen occur in the mitochondrion. As you can see, the plant cell has a mitochondrion, proving that plants really need oxygen. But how do plants exactly breathe? How do we get the necessary oxygen for the plant cells? Gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide enter or leave a plant through tiny holes called stomata. Saan ba makikita ang stomata? They are mostly found in the underside of its leaves. Here, we can see the stomata in action. They are the tiny holes on the leaf. Going back to the oxygen and carbon dioxide cycle. When we exhale, we release carbon dioxide, which is then used by plants in photosynthesis. They use this to create simple sugars or food. As a byproduct, they release oxygen, and this oxygen returns to the atmosphere. Now this free oxygen is the one which we inhale. Now this free oxygen in the atmosphere in our environment is the one which we inhale back for our metabolic processes. And then the cycle goes on. We are done with the water and oxygen carbon dioxide cycle. Now let's proceed to the third major biogeochemical cycle, the nitrogen cycle. Air is about 78% nitrogen gas. Living things just like us need nitrogen for making protein, since protein is the basic organic material in living organisms. However, hindi natin kayang directly magamit ang nitrogen na nasa atmosphere. This nitrogen has to be converted into compounds called nitrates. In the process of converting, certain bacteria called nitrogen-fixing bacteria and algae in the soil can convert nitrogen into nitrates in a process called nitrogen fixation. In this picture, we can see the nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the root nodules of some plants. Plants absorb nitrates through their roots. When animals eat plants, they take in plant proteins containing nitrogen. Then they convert this into animal proteins. When plants and animals die, they release nitrogen compounds. What happens next? Another group of useful bacteria, called nitrifying bacteria, convert these nitrogen compounds first into nitrites, NO2, and then into nitrates. These nitrates can be assimilated into the soil and be used by plants and animals again. Still, another bacteria called the nitrification bacteria release nitrogen from the nitrates back into the atmosphere, thus completing the cycle. Then, the nitrogen in the air will be used again. The first three cycles are the ones most commonly found in science books. But just for some additional information, we're also going to discuss a fourth cycle, which is the phosphorus cycle. Rocks contain phosphorus. The weathering of rocks, for example those found in the mountains, will cause the formation of underground phosphate reserve. This phosphate will be absorbed by plants, and when plants are eaten by animals, they will also be incorporated into the body of the animals. When these plants and animals die, they are decomposed and broken down, and the phosphate in these dead organisms will be released back to the environment, adding to the phosphate reserve on land. This phosphate reserve can leach toward a body of water. Aside from that, the phosphate-containing fertilizers from farmlands can also run off to bodies of water. Additionally, the phosphate from the weathered rocks can be carried through the water and contribute to the formation of phosphate sediments in the underwater and consequently the underwater phosphate reserve. These processes will soon contribute to the formation of a new rock. Then, this new rock which contains phosphorus will undergo weathering, releasing phosphate back into the environment, and then the phosphorus cycle goes on. Biogeochemical cycles are said to be pathways of matter. Why is that so? Because they are any of the natural pathways by which essential elements of living organisms are circulated. They show that matter is recycled in any of these cycles, and because of these biogeochemical cycles, the essential elements are brought back and used by living organisms. Time's up. Let's start with number 1. A process that occurs when water becomes water vapor. Ang keyword o ang clue ay water vapor. The answer is evaporation. Number 2. Water that flows over the land surface. Yon ang ating keywords. Flows over land. This is surface runoff. Kapag hindi na kaya mag-penetrate ng water sa soil, it will flow over the land surface. Number 3. A process where certain bacteria convert nitrogen gas into nitrates. These bacteria are nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So, ang process ay tinatawag na nitrogen fixation. Number 4. Tiny openings or pores in plant tissue that allow for gas exchange. Ang gas na pumapasok can be carbon dioxide or oxygen. What is the term for these openings? It's stomata. Kapag isa lang na opening, it's stoma. Last number 5, a process that uses carbon dioxide for plant food production. From the choices, tanggal na ang legumes at nitrification kasi sila ay sa nitrogen cycle. We will be focusing on photosynthesis and respiration. Which among these two produces food for the plant and uses carbon dioxide? It is photosynthesis. In contrast, respiration uses oxygen to release energy.
The most essential learning competency, or MEL 30, suggests ways to minimize human impact on the environment. From the previous lesson, you have learned the flow of energy between organisms that can be shown by a food chain or a food web, and how materials cycle in an ecosystem. In this lesson, you will learn more about how organisms interact with each other and their environment to meet their basic needs and survive, such as identify the different human activities that affect the ecosystem, assume the responsibility for environmental care, and create an output about protecting the ecosystem. To start off, when you hear or see the word environment, what song, dance, word, or item that comes into your mind? Here are some of the possible answers. Did you find yours? Now, think about this. Do our activities as humans affect the environment? Why does every human action affect the ecosystem? But first, what's an ecosystem? An ecosystem refers to a community of living organisms and their interactions with the environment. Most human activities such as agriculture, industry, fishing, and mining negatively affect the ecosystem, especially when performed in an excessive and unsustainable way. Global warming, pollution, and extinction of species are some of the consequences of such human behavior. Humans are the top consumers in many food pyramids. To increase food production, they use methods that affect food chains and food webs. Some of the farming practices are as follows: monoculture, herbicides and insecticides, and the use of chemical fertilizers. First is monoculture. This is the cultivation of a single crop in large areas. Vast tracts of land are converted into rice farms, sugar farms, and coconut farms. By limiting the cultivation of different kinds of plants, People also deprive many animals of their home and food. These animals, some of which feed on insect pests, move to other places. Only the insect pests that eat the monocrop remain in the area. If uncontrolled, these pests can wipe out the monocrop in a short time. Some soil microorganisms depend on specific plants for food. Eliminating these plants is harmful to the microorganisms, since microorganisms are responsible for returning plant nutrients to the soil. The cycling of nutrients for reuse of the plants is disturbed. Next is the use of herbicides and insecticides. Farmers spray their crops with insecticides to kill insect pests and with herbicides to kill weeds. However, the chemicals also destroy other organisms, including beneficial insects and soil organisms which help in decay. Insecticides move up the food pyramid and accumulate in the body of organisms. The smallest concentration of the chemical is at the base of the pyramid occupied by the producers. The amount increases towards the top. The greatest concentration is found in the top consumers such as birds, mammals, and humans. Many insect pests become resistant to chemicals. This may lead to the use of increased amount of pesticides. Use of chemical fertilizers. Monocrops usually require large amounts of chemical fertilizers. Continuous and uncontrolled use of chemical fertilizers may increase soil acidity, thus destroying soil structure. Findings show that more fertilizers are needed for the same amount of yield after years of monoculture. Fertilizers may run off to the rivers, ponds, and lakes. Accumulation of fertilizers may cause the death of these bodies of water. Fertilizers in the water will cause increased growth of algae and other water plants. They cover the water surface and block the passage of oxygen. Thus, less oxygen is dissolved in water. Furthermore, when algae and aquatic plants die, decaying microorganisms use oxygen. Undissolved oxygen becomes insufficient, causing fish and other aquatic animals to die. To conserve the environment, here are some desirable practices. First, grow a variety of crops instead of only one crop. Use insects to fight other insects. This is known as biological control of insect pests. Instead of using chemical fertilizers, try organic farming, using natural fertilizers for crops. Some natural fertilizers are compost and animal manure. Human intervention has had a range of effects on natural biodiversity. Agriculture has expanded into environmentally sensitive regions. In its natural state, an area of land that has shrubs and grasses on it has an inherent tolerance against flooding, drought, and insect infestation. Because of expanding lands for agriculture and diversification of crops such as growing corn, some ecosystems have become more vulnerable. For our next activity, Activity 2, predict the consequences. Here we have the list of situations and a list of consequences. Match the following situations to their corresponding consequences. After the activity, did you realize something? Are these things happening right now? Did you experience any of these consequences? What do you feel after knowing these activities affect our environment? What can we do to help avoid these consequences? Let's watch this video and answer the following questions. Environmental Problems in the Philippines by Paul Plaza.
Nothing I can say won't fade. When you're not hurting, this is our last goodbye. Stay the night, even just for a moment. Stay the night, even just for a moment.
Sari-saring uri ng mga ilegal na pinutol na kahoy ang nasabat ng mga otoridad sa lalawigan ng
Amoy may bumabagsak na lava mula sa Mount Banahaw pasado alas 6 kagabi. Yun pala'y nilalamon na ng apoy ang paligid ng crater.
Kahapon, tanaw pa rin ang makapal na usok mula sa sulfur vents malapit sa tuktok ng Mount Apo.
Nalaman ang pagbaha sa pagkakaingin sa kabundukan kaya hindi na nito napigil ang tubig.
This is the last remaining watershed in north-central Mindanao. It's supposed to be protected land, but there's less than 10% of the forests left.
This is not a landfill. This is the ocean. More than 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic has been produced globally in the last 70 years.
Nanatiling malaking problema sa Metro Manila ang mga basura sa mga sapa, ilog, pati na sa Manila Bay.
Pero sa aming paglalayag papunta sa Isla Pulo sa Nabotas, ito ang tumambad sa amin. Mga inanod na basura mula sa iba't ibang kalapit na probinsya. Ayon sa pag-aaral ng Greenpeace, pinakamalaking pinagmumula ng polusyon sa mga ilog ang mga duming nanggagaling sa mga bahay. Sunod na riyan ang mga duming galing sa pagsasaka, pag-aalaga ng hayop at iba pang industriya.
Air is one of the basic necessities we human beings cannot live without. How do we ensure that we breathe clean air every day?
The haze that cover parts of Metro Manila. But it looks different in the morning when the haze is thicker and darker.
Metro Manila counts almost 8 million vehicles and growing, contributing to a staggering 80% of the total cause of air pollution.
Ang Benham Rise ay nasa dagat Pasipiko na may mahigit 200 kilometro ang layo mula sa Aurora Province. Talampas o tabletop mountain ito na nasa ilalim ng karagatan at mayaman sa mga bahura.
Oil exploration between the Philippines and China in the West Philippine Sea. Nevertheless, Malacanang maintains to uphold the arbitral rule.
Military revealed that China had sent a ship to Benham Rise.
normally killers with this much desire. Together we're winners. They say that we're out of control and some say we're sinners, but don't let them ruin our beautiful rhythm. Fire on fire, we're normally killers with this much desire. Together we're winners. They say that we're out of control and some say we're sinners, but don't let them ruin our beautiful rhythm. 'Cause when you unfold me and tell me you love me and look in my eyes, you are perfection, my only direction. It's fire on fire. You are perfection, my only direction. It's fire on fire.
What are the disasters mentioned in the video? Who do you think is responsible for the following disasters? Are you affected by this? Why? Or why not? Why disasters continue to happen? Put a finger down if you know a farmer or a fisherman or have a fruit or vegetable garden. Put a finger down if you have an illness due to pollution. Put a finger down if you ever experience a disaster caused by environmental problems. Put a finger down if you lost your home or went to an evacuation center due to natural disasters. And last, put a finger down if there is an environmental problem in your job. Now, let's have the results. What was your score? 5. You're a veteran eco-warrior. Time to educate other people. 3 to 4. You're a battling eco-activist. Time to enlighten others. 1 to 2. You haven't necessarily cracked eco-friendliness yourself. It's time to take your eco-efforts to the next level. And 0. Now it's time to eco-educate yourself.